Can this demon and the child Horus explain this missing cornucopia? My name is Tyler, and I think I might have an explanation. So what is or who is the Eon? In the pictures you saw before in the cult of Mithras, the Leontocephaline figure is also known as the Eon. In the previous video I made, I explained this figure a little bit more in depth. This is an embodiment of the long stretch of time known as the precession of the equinox, or the precession of the vernal equinox. In astronomy, the eon is approximately 1 billion years. In the tarot, the eon, which is also called judgment, is shown as the Greek god of Harpocrates. And Harpocrates is a retelling of the myth of the Child Horus of ancient Egypt. The symbol of the Child Horus and Harpocrates is the Cornucopia. This is the tarot. This is showing the multiple cards of the Eon and the Judgment. You can see anglicized. This one has like the Gregorian flag and also a winged angel-like figure. But the one in the center is the one we'll focus on. That's the Eon, otherwise known as Harpocrates, or the Child of Horus. So, who is the Child of Horus? In the legend of the history of Egypt, Osiris is killed by his evil brother Set and dismembered into 14 pieces. Isis, the wife of Osiris, reforms the dead body of Osiris long enough to conceive the Child of Horus. This child is then kept hidden from Set in the reeds of the Nile Delta, similarly to Moses. So part of what I'm going to explain here is how legends and myth cross cultures and overlap and change. And then how all of those can be presumed to have a common origin, or you can also use them to explain other cross-culture items as well. So the Child Horus is depicted with a single horn and sucking on his forefinger. This is where we get the shush gesture. This would be the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a child sucking on their thumb. But instead, they would depict it as the forefinger. The point of the child being quiet is to keep the child secret until he matures. And this is to illustrate, as a symbolic legend, the purpose of secret keeping. Isis being the name of a mystery cult in ancient Egypt. So this is also to illustrate why we have secrets and also the purpose for keeping a secret and when you might want to do that. So if there's somebody who's trying to kill children, then you want to keep the child safe, you have to keep the child secret also. And then you wait until it matures. This is a metaphor and an allegory that can be used for other things. Supposedly, if you are launching a secret attack on another country, empire, tribe, whatever, you'll want to plan, and you'll want to put that plan together until the plan is ready before you enact the plan. And if they find out about the plan, they'll be able to then sabotage it in some way. Just like how if Set found out about Horus, he'd be able to sabotage his growth and try to kill him. So this is a couple depictions of the Child Horus or Harpocrates. Again, using the sucking on the forefinger motion. You can see also the single horn, and that's to depict like youth as a young child, and this could also be interpreted as like a braid of hair as well. You can see some of these figures have either like the snake motif or the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. That's the unifying crown. This is a couple depictions here. This center one being Horus matured, Isis, and then in the center, the pieces of the embalmed Osiris. And then on the right here is Isis with the child Horus. You can see that Isis has horns and the disc here, so that being the disc of the sun, and then the horns of the constellation Taurus. Because in ancient Egypt, in the early periods, what we would call the pre-dynastic to first dynasty, early kingdom, the precession of the equinox showed the equinox every year in the sign of Taurus. And this is why they have their apex bull or apex bull. That's the one that carried the sun. So Isis, the cult, is shown as having the knowledge and the authority and the power of the cosmos. And then that is being bestowed onto the child of Horus until Horus matures. This one specifically is a motif here, again showing the horns and the disc, but also the child. And this being a boat given to them as their route of escape to get away from the evil set. And then the Metternich stela of magical healing. This is one of the most detailed accounts of the myth. Isis recounts how Horus is found lifeless, stung by a scorpion, or bitten by a snake. The sun god Ra sends Thoth, who recounts powerful spells and names each demon and toxin and commands them to retreat. Through Thoth's words and Isis's love, Horus is restored. The same instance happens again after Horus matures and faces Set. And during this battle, the same Thoth revives the eye of Horus. So we'll get into a little bit of this. This is the Metternich stela. You can see the front and the back here. It's about 3 feet tall by 1 foot wide. Oh, whoops, let me change that back. And this is a motif just kind of showing more of the hieroglyph inscriptions. Now, what I'm trying to show here is that there's a pretty significant legend when it comes to this child here. Having been kept secret, having been raised, and I think that there's a little bit different of an interpretation that you could gather from some of these here. You also have to remember this Thoth character being also translated as the Hermes, and also having some kind of relation to a legend of an emerald tablet. That could easily be some kind of stela of this nature. These were common to have inscriptions of things of medicine associated with legends and specific information, so that way people could understand the diseases as they knew them, because their science was very, very far from perfect. So, as a side note, the Eye of Horus, a lot of people think that it's like the brain, but there's not really like that good evidence of a lot of like Egyptian people being like split, like clean down the center to see that like eye shape. They would see the brain as like, a 3D shape like we see it, and they would also try to move it through the nose so it would come out in pieces. But in the legend, after spending his whole life in secret, Horus is now mature and faces Set. In the recurring battle, Set blinds Horus in one eye. Thoth returns to restore Horus's sight. Horus's new eye allows him to gain greater sight and knowledge, which he uses to defeat Set. This is an allegory for gaining true wisdom, known as gnosis, the ability to see things as they actually are. So, a good metaphor to understand this would be something like, you can tell somebody a stove is hot, like 1,000 times, and just by looking at it, they might not know. But if they touch it once really quickly, that information of it being hot is transferred to them instantly, and they absolutely understand and have physical experience of that. So this is the difference of just having sight or having this type of enhanced wisdom sight that is the restored eye of Horus. So what I'm going to get at is that this legend is more of an embodiment of a couple of other things. Just as we've described in earlier videos, that a legend or a god or a thing can be an embodiment or a metaphor or a parable of something else. But this image is just to kind of show you a couple of things here. So this is the Child Horus with the single horn, and outside here is the eye of Horus, the regained sight. You can see kind of these arms. That's supposed to be Nut or night. That's outer space. Essentially, that's the god of night, is the embodiment of the outer space, and the heavens and the stars is Nut. And then this serpent here, I believe I've described also being the Ouroboros, or you could describe that possibly being the constellation Draco that spins the cosmic heavens. I believe there is relation there. There's the bull depicted here, which holds everything up. That is the sign of Taurus for the precession of the equinox as it would be seen in the early kingdoms of Egypt. And then the lions here, that has other significant meaning as well. That has to relate to the Leontocephaline figure. And if you watch my previous videos on the Eon, it'll kind of describe how all of this has relation to the stars and a time-telling kind of story. But where did they get this power? Where did the child get his knowledge? And where did Egypt get its knowledge of mathematics, science, medicine, society? We've discussed stories are cultural symbols. They are simplistic interpretations of actual historical legends and accounts. The stories and the characters and the names get changed as the culture and the language changes. You can have the same society, and their language will change over the course of 1,000 years. It just naturally does, just because you have different people than you did previously. Ancient Egypt lasted for thousands of years. It would make sense that they would change these legends for the new generations as they come in. And you would want the people who could tell the legends properly to pass them down. We can see and demonstrate not only a single cultural legend overlap, but also the change of the Egyptian legends and others to the Hellenistic period. This is because all of these stories were meant to demonstrate something that actually happened in real life, something in history or in nature. And during the Hellenistic period, this legend of the child Horus becomes Harpocrates, and the Cornucopia is the tool they carry everything necessary for their escape. So this will have some symbolic meaning. The Cornucopia, the harvest, the time, the waiting to mature, like the ripeness of the child coming to age, being kept secret. All of these things have interrelation and are supposed to be expressed through this legend. This is how they would tell about the importance of these aspects and concepts. So you can see a little bit of a visual here. This is Osiris with his winged kind of Upper Egypt crown, giving this large amount of bounty to Isis. Isis here, again, having the horns and the disc. Now, in ancient Egypt, they didn't have this horn of plenty concept. They would just have some kind of bowl offering or some kind of altar with all of these items maxed together. So this is what he's holding here. But as it changes over into the Greek period, the Greeks used this type of wicker basket, cornucopia, to carry things. And that's what they would use to also depict the carrying of these things. You could also say that the cornucopia itself is to carry the secret with you. And this is just another instrument here to kind of illustrate another one of the relational symbols in another video. This is Isis depicted again with the horns and the disc holding the rod, and as we've described, the rod being the axis on which the whole heavens turn. So this is supposed to be not actual people. Remember, Isis and Osiris were probably not actual like one persons that existed. They were probably groups of people, Isis being a representation of this group of Isis, this secretive underground initiatory cult like the cult of Mithras. And these people would hold interesting and complex knowledge that was challenging for the regular population to understand. And they would format these legends so that way people could kind of grasp the history and why we do things a certain way. Because they would have their own laws and their own interpretations, so they would need to come up with this kind of thing. I'm going to just show a couple of depictions here of the Hellenistic Harpocraty. So you can see here the cherubic-like child with his finger to his mouth. This one here with the helmet of Hermes, with the winged helmet of Hermes, finger to mouth. Then this one also another cherubic form, and this one on the back of the horse. You can actually see like these three almost look like they have a candle-like crown that's kind of similar to the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt here. So you can see like this one's almost like a candle-like figure. And then if you go back to these ones, it's almost kind of the same thing. And then this one on the far right, you can see he's holding the horn of plenty instead of wearing it as Harpocrates wears his horn. So this is to still keep it, but it changes as the culture changes. The legend stays the same, but the telling of it doesn't. These are more Hellenistic versions of the cherubic form of Harpocrates. The child with, again, some type of small crown with the finger to the mouth. In the cornucopia depicted here, this one he's coming out of a horn. This one is a really well-made sculpture. You can really see the horn here with the fruits coming out of it, and then the laurel wreath that you'd see in the later Hellenistic periods. And then this one is actually even more cherubic with the wings. So you can see that as time goes on, this cherubic form then becomes relational to Christianity after the Hellenistic period. So it goes Egypt to Hellenist to Christian. And then that's how you have the relationship between this child Harpocrates and then this winged cherubic figure, the judgment, being the end of time. So how does this tie in? If you've heard of the Mandela effect, it's a phenomenon that people say the collective consciousness is a little bit off from actual reality, in that people collectively remember something that's incorrect, but there's enough people that remember it that it becomes kind of like a subconscious afterthought or question as to what actually happened, even though the official story is something different. Named after Nelson Mandela, A lot of people thought he died in prison, but actually he did not, as the story goes. There's other ones founded as well. Specifically for me, I do distinctly remember a cornucopia in the Fruit of the Loom logo. I could be remembering it wrong, but that's what my inner mind and my inner intuition tells me. Now, the official story from the Fruit of the Loom company is that there isn't and never was. So, Fruit of the Loom is a clothing company founded in 1851. Some people, such as myself, distinctly remember there being the logo. They say there never was one, and the disconnect is part of this Mandela effect, or so they say. But I think there might be another explanation that could be possible. So this is, again, just to show the official Fruit of the Loom logo on the top. The one with the supposed cornucopia, and actually this is stylized pretty much exactly as I would have remembered it. You know, nobody really remembers it facing the other way. Nobody really remembers it being like a different kind of like style. They remember it like this like brown husk kind of figure and not like an interwoven like mesh. They don't remember it being like see-through. They remember it being solid. There's a couple of different ways, but I think this is probably pretty darn close as to what I would say is actual. Now, this on the left here is the timeline of their official logos. They're saying that it never was on any of these logos in any current form. And their official quote from their website is, "Fruit of the Loom has not now, nor ever, included a cornucopia in our world-famous fruit cluster trademark." But let's talk about a possibility. So I also have to mention here, for a little bit of background information, Helena Blavatsky and her secret doctrine. This was written in the 1800s. She claims that there are Mahatma in the Tibet or the Himalayas who claim to carry knowledge from Atlantis. She proposes that these mystics are an initiatory secret order who protect ancient primordial knowledge. Supposedly, these mystics are also the precursors to all religion, and that they've created religion as a way to craft narrative for cultures. Just like how, as the culture changes, they need these myths changed, these are the people who would do it, the people who have the most ancient cosmological knowledge of the planet Earth. So, whether or not you believe in Atlantis, there are people who have crafted a narrative that Atlantis is real. Now, I think that it's possible that there's a pre-Ice Age civilization. I don't know about the specifics of Atlantis, and a lot of people want to come up with a lot of types of specifics. So I think that there are people that take the little breadcrumbs of knowledge that's out there, and they extrapolate them into a larger domain that they can then call religion or culture or politics or whatever you want. It's just a different way to interpret reality. There's the scientific way, there's the natural primordial way, there's like the Christian interpretation, there's the astrotheological interpretation, but it's all trying to describe what we're experiencing, what we can all share in knowledge. And actually, the word for cosmic balance in ancient Egyptian is mat. So, like Mahatma. I am curious to know if it's possible that she's correct, because this is pretty interesting if she is. So, my theories are a little bit different than, say, what she might believe, but also I would say that there are possible things that could exist also. So legends and myths are typically loose composites of actual history. Stories are simplified over time and changed with many retellings, and it'll change like a big game of telephone. We know the cult of Isis was a secret initiatory order. We know orders of this nature can gain huge following and spread really wide, as evidenced by the cult of Mithras. If you remember in my previous video, the cult of Mithras made more than 1,000 underground temples on 3 continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. What if the Horus legend describes the birth of Egypt, Osiris being Atlantis, or this pre-Ice Age civilization that was destroyed and reformed under the order of Isis, brought to the Nile Delta, like supposedly the Horus child was brought to the Nile Delta reeds, hidden there, and assisted by Thoth, which could be Hermetic mystics who understand like that type of wisdom and interpretation. And then over time, that changes to add the Cornucopia, the allusion to time, long stretches of time, waiting for something to mature, like the culture of Egypt to mature, or the culture of the Greeks and the Hellenists to mature, the ripeness of that culture and the harvest of it. And also in these stories, things, places, and societies can be embodied by a single figure. So just as we discussed like all of night being embodied by one thing, so too can a culture be embodied by a single person or being. I believe it's possible that secret narrative crafting, myth-making organizations still exist. And if they do, they need to maintain their grasp on these types of narratives and the population, especially in this digital age when anybody can kind of say anything. I believe they need to test how effective their efforts are in non-consequential ways. So that way, if there was some kind of emergency, like the rapid changeover to the Hellenist period through Alexander the Great, they need to know that they have the confidence in their mechanisms of narrative control. So that way they can reform these myths and keep their dominance in a secretive, underhanded way, no matter who ends up taking control of the area. Just like how they were able to keep the legend and change over everything from Egypt to Greek after Alexander took over, they would still be able to maintain control in other ways under the surface as well. I believe it's possible that the Fruit of the Loom Cornucopia is one of these tests. I don't think it should surprise anybody that there's value in being capable of erasing or rewriting history in the modern era, especially if you're somebody that deals in secrets. And remember, this is a god and a depiction of the importance of secret keeping. So this could be a demonstration to a larger group of people. This could be advertisement of their ability to say, hey, look, we can get rid of this. It could be signaling to other types of secretive initiatory groups to say, hey, we are timing this right. We are enacting this plan to harvest or escape with this cornucopia to get rid of it. And also I'll leave you with this final quote at the bottom for this portion, that the power to destroy a thing is the absolute control over it. This is by Frank Herbert in his novel Dune. So this is to reference a time in the novel when there's a really important resource, and this resource has the ability to be completely gone, and your enemies can't let that happen if they need that resource as well. Knowledge is a resource. Secrets are a resource. Leverage through those knowledge and secrets are a resource as well. If you can leverage someone with blackmail, that's better sometimes than being able to do a thing yourself. You let the other person use their resources to do it, and then you take it after. This would be important to understand if you're going to be an emperor of a place like Egypt, or Sumer, or Greece or Rome. This is just a couple of different iterations of this same type of gesture being translated across different periods. So this one being the Harpocrates with the finger gesture. This one, you can see, has been already completely changed over into the Hellenistic cherub figure that also has kind of a European-style face, the wings, and the secret shush gesture. Instead of it just being like a sucking on the finger, it's an actual like over-the-lip shush. And holding the standard of Rome, SPQR, Senus Populus K Romanus. That being past the Hellenist period into the already Roman Empire period. And then that changes to our modern interpretation of the shh, or quiet gesture, or keep secret gesture. Now, this next portion I know is going to be really controversial. I believe this type of symbolic destruction happens often. I believe that no matter who you think of who or what or why these attacks of 9/11 happened, but I believe that one of the reasons that the Twin Towers were targeted for destruction was for this purpose. I believe that the destruction of these two towers was meant to echo the symbolic destruction of the pillars of Jason and Boaz, which are an echo themselves of the pillars of Enoch. The pillars of Jason and Boaz being the pillars on the outside of the Temple of Solomon. And if you watch my previous video, I'll explain more about the relationship between those pillars and a legend of even more ancient pillars that tie back into the possibility of Atlantis. And those are the pillars of Enoch. I would recommend watching that video as well. Whether or not you believe it, this type of story is told to people that do. So, regardless of who did it or why, there are people that believe in these types of symbolic, grand stories as a way to understand the passing of time and the change of history. And some of these people have a lot of connections and wealth, and they are needed to get on board when it comes to some type of war or invasion, particularly if you're trying to invade a place like Iraq, because that's classically Babylon, or otherwise known as Mesopotamia. So, artifacts, the regime change thing, oil, empire expansion, these are all sales pitches that you can bring to billionaires who may or may not believe in this kind of stuff to get backing for your war. If you're somebody that wants to go to war and you need to get different people on board, and this attack has happened, whether or not you did it, whether or not somebody else did it, whether or not it is an actual honest-to-goodness terrorist attack as they've described, doesn't matter. You can use it to then fulfill lots of different goals. It doesn't matter how it happened, who it happened to, or why. If you can come up with a good enough explanation for all of that and get somebody on board, that has value. That has a lot of value. If there's somebody who is really keyed into ancient Babylon and the Ishtar Gate and different types of pottery and the ancient tombs and things like that, and you say, hey, look at this, these guys destroyed this really important thing and we have to go get that, they could probably get on board with that type of invasion. And I'll leave this section with a quote by Churchill, which is, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." I believe that there is a lot of value in these type of narrative crafters, these storytellers, these secret collaborators, to sway people's opinion in a covert or overt way. because you need the public's support when you have this type of catastrophe. And you also need the backing of people that are high up, so that way you can have political, military, and economic power. So I'll just also finish with just a couple of images here. This far left one being the two pillars, or a depiction of the two pillars of the Pillars of Enoch. You can kind of see that it actually kind of resembles the stela from earlier. This one almost being the same shape. And then this center being a depiction of the outside of the Temple of Solomon, the Jason and the Boaz pillars, and then paralleled with the Twin Towers. So again, even if this wasn't intentionally done this way, there are people who will believe that it was if you have a convincing enough story. And these people deal in these types of convincing narratives, and they're constantly writing and rewriting them. And it's their job to get other people on board for this kind of stuff. And this is how secret keepers dealt back and forth. And then this final picture I think is really interesting. It's actually the Eye of Horus holding forward two burning towers. I don't think this actually has any relation, but if I was going to try to convince somebody that there was a prophecy, that all of this was going to happen, I would say, hey, it's time for the end times. These pillars, which are our pillars of knowledge, have been destroyed, just as they described and destroyed the pillars of Jason and Boaz when they raided the Temple of Solomon, just as the pillars of Enoch were destroyed with Atlantis. I believe that that's possible. I'm not sure what everybody else thinks. But that's why we're putting it out there. Goodbye.